some for decades, historians believed intelligence grew slowly, one civilization after another, primitive then advanced. That was the official story. But then something changed. In 2023, a group of genetic researchers compared ancient DNA samples from civilizations across Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. Their goal seemed simple: track how human cognitive traits evolved through time. But buried deep inside the data was one result nobody predicted. One ancient population showed genetic patterns linked to unusually high cognitive adaptation, higher than nearby empires, higher than expected. And the strangest part? That civilization had almost vanished from mainstream history. No giant empire, no famous kings, no massive monuments, just fragments, broken tablets, abandoned ruins, and whispers. What they found shocked everyone, because the discovery raised a terrifying possibility. What if history remembered the wrong civilizations? What if the smartest ancient society was the one we ignored? So what really happened? The answer will change how you see ancient history. For most people, ancient intelligence follows a familiar list: Egypt, Greece, Rome, China, Mesopotamia. These civilizations dominate documentaries, docs, books, museums. Their inventions shaped the modern world, or so we were told. But intelligence is difficult to measure, especially across thousands of years. Ancient people left behind buildings, weapons, art, mathematics, languages, but DNA, that was different. For years, scientists believed ancient genetics could reveal migration patterns, family connections, disease. Few imagined it could reopen one of history's most uncomfortable questions: did some ancient societies develop cognitive advantages earlier than others? And if they did, why? The project began quietly. Researchers from several universities collected skeletal remains from ancient burial sites. Some came from famous civilizations. Others came from cultures barely discussed outside archaeology circles. The team compared thousands of genetic markers, not intelligence itself. Science cannot directly measure the IQ of ancient people. But researchers studied gene variants statistically associated with educational attainment, brain development, memory processing, and neurological efficiency in modern populations, carefully, cautiously. Because this field is dangerous, misused genetics has destroyed lives before, so the researchers repeated one warning constantly: genes do not determine human worth. Environment matters, culture matters. Nutrition matters, education matters. But even with those warnings, patterns began appearing, and one pattern refused to disappear. A forgotten civilization from the Eurasian steppe kept producing unexpected results, again and again. This is where the story gets strange, because archaeologists already knew something unusual about them. Their trade networks stretched impossibly far. Their metallurgy appeared too advanced for their era. Their burial sites contained symbols nobody fully decoded. And now genetics entered the picture. Suddenly, old mysteries looked different. Who were these people really? Why did their influence vanish so completely? And why did later civilizations seem strangely determined to erase them? But the real story was buried much deeper. The Eurasian steppe stretches across continents. Cold winds, open plains, a landscape that feels endless. For centuries, historians treated the steppe as empty space, a corridor, not a civilization. Nomads passed through. Empires crossed it. Armies died there. But permanent greatness? Few expected it. That assumption lasted generations. Then archaeologists started digging, and the ground answered back. The first major discoveries appeared during the late 19th century. Russian archaeologists uncovered burial mounds called kurgans. At first glance, they seemed ordinary: bones, weapons, horse remains. But deeper inside the tombs were impossible objects, intricate metalwork, precision tools, jewelry with geometric patterns beyond neighboring cultures. Some graves contained surgical instruments, others held wheeled vehicles centuries earlier than expected. One's tomb revealed evidence of advanced horse domestication. Another contained traces of fermented medicine. The dates shocked researchers. These people were doing complex things far earlier than the historical timeline suggested. The civilization eventually became linked to several Bronze Age cultures, the Sintashta, the Andronovo. Related Indo-European steppe populations. Most people have never heard those names, but their influence may have shaped half the ancient world. Archaeologists notice migration patterns extending from the steppe into Europe, Persia, and parts of South Asia. Languages traveled with them, technologies traveled with them, myths traveled with them, and possibly new cognitive adaptations traveled too. The evidence remains scattered, one excavation here, another there. Then came the chariots. Researchers uncovered some of the oldest known spoke-wheeled chariots, not crude carts. Engineered machines, balanced, lightweight, fast. Military historians stared at the findings in disbelief. The designs were too sophisticated. They required advanced mathematics, material science, animal training, strategic planning. Someone had organized all of this. Someone understood systems. And that detail mattered, because intelligence leaves patterns, not just inventions, coordination, adaptation. The more researchers studied the steppe cultures, harder they became to dismiss. Then another discovery complicated everything: ancient ritual sites, circular enclosures, astronomical alignments, burned offerings, complex symbolism. One site in modern Russia became especially controversial. Archaeum, often called the Russian Stonehenge. From above, the city looked planned, carefully designed. Not random, not primitive. Its layout showed defensive engineering, water management, social organization. Some researchers compared it to early urban experiments elsewhere. Yet almost nobody outside archaeology discussed it. Why? Partly because history had already chosen its heroes. Egypt had pyramids, Rome had legions, Greece had philosophy, the steppe had dirt mounds. Or so it seemed. Then genetics arrived, and suddenly the dirt mounds became something else entirely. In the early 2000s, ancient DNA technology improved dramatically. Scientists extracted genetic material from teeth and petrous bones. For the first time, researchers could compare ancient populations directly. Migration theories changed overnight. Entire chapters of human history were rewritten. The steppe cultures became central to those discussions because their genetic signatures appeared everywhere: Europe, South Asia, Central Asia. Sometimes suddenly, almost explosively, this raised uncomfortable questions. How did one relatively unknown population spread influence so widely? What gave them that advantage? Was it military power? Climate adaptation? Disease resistance? Or something more complicated? And that question has never been fully answered. The first clue came from a problem researchers weren't even trying to solve. Population replacement. Ancient DNA studies showed major demographic shifts in Bronze Age Europe, massive ones. In some regions, older genetic lineages nearly vanished. New lineages spread rapidly. The data pointed toward steppe-related populations. That alone was shocking. But one detail didn't fit. These migrations moved unusually fast, faster than many earlier expansions. Why? Researchers proposed horses, chariots, new weapons, yes, but there was another possibility: superior social coordination, better long-term planning, higher adaptability under stress. Traits connected not to brute strength, mat cognition. Then researchers studying educational attainment genetics noticed something strange. Several gene clusters associated with neurological efficiency appeared at higher frequencies in some ancient steppe samples than expected for that era. The scientists were cautious, very cautious. They avoided dramatic language because genetics is messy. No single gene creates intelligence. Human ability from countless interactions, but statistically patterns existed. and they demanded explanation. At first, critics dismissed the findings. Sample sizes were small, ancient DNA degrades, contamination happens, fair arguments, but then additional studies arrived. Different teams, different sites, different methods, the signal remained. What they found shocked everyone. Because the results suggested these populations may have undergone strong selection pressures favoring problem solving and adaptability, not magical intelligence, not superiority, adaptation. The steppe environment was brutal, long winters, core scarcity, constant mobility, survival demanded planning. Cooperation, a single mistake meant death. Over generations, those pressures may have shaped cognitive traits. That theory made sense. But then something changed. Researchers compared the genetic patterns against archaeological behavior. And suddenly the coincidences piled up. The metallurgy was advanced, yes, but the organization behind it looked even more impressive. Ore extraction, trade routes, smelting techniques, distribution systems. Complex societies require information management. Someone tracked resources, someone coordinated labor, someone planned seasons ahead. And the archaeological timeline suggested they did it earlier than expected. Then came linguistics. Many researchers believe Indo-European languages spread partly through steppe migrations. That includes ancestors of English, Hindi, Persian, Russian, and many European languages. If true, then these populations shaped how billions communicate today. But language spread requires more than violence. Cultures adopt languages when systems work. Trade, administration, adaptability. Again, the same question appeared. Why were these people so effective? Then researchers uncovered another clue. Burial inequality. Some graves showed extraordinary wealth, others showed specialization. Warriors, craftsmen, religious figures. This implied social complexity, not random tribes, structured hierarchy. And structure means cognition at scale, planning beyond individual survival. One archaeologist described the phenomenon bluntly. These societies behaved ahead of their time. That sentence spread quietly through academic circles. Ahead of their time, but how far ahead? And why did mainstream history barely mention them? Then came the mini revelation. Researchers comparing ancient genomes discovered that steppe ancestry appeared disproportionately among later elite groups in multiple regions. Warrior classes, ruling lineages, mobile aristocracies. The pattern repeated too often to ignore. No one expected what came next, because the findings hinted that these forgotten populations didn't just migrate. They may have reshaped the leadership structures of entire civilizations. And if that was true, history itself looked very different. Everything pointed toward one answer. Human intelligence wasn't developing in isolated civilizations. It was spreading through networks, migration, trade, intermarriage, adaptation. One clean, simple answer. But there was one thing no one had checked. The children, ancient child burials from the same region, because if cognitive selection pressures truly existed, traces might appear across generations. And one newly analyzed grave contained a detail researchers never expected, a developmental pattern, one that suggested these ancient populations matured differently under environmental stress. That detail would unravel everything. Mass for generations, history celebrated the same ancient powers, Egypt, Rome, Greece, Mesopotamia. Meanwhile, the Eurasian steppe remained a footnote nepe plains. Nomads, forgotten migrations, but ancient DNA changed that picture. Researchers discovered genetic patterns linked to adaptability and cognitive development appearing repeatedly in steppe populations. At the same time, archaeology revealed advanced metallurgy, complex trade systems, early chariot engineering, long-distance cultural influence. Separately, those facts seemed manageable. Together, they formed something unsettling, a hidden engine behind major historical transformations. Then came the burial, the elite skeleton connecting multiple civilizations. And finally, child remains suggesting unusual developmental adaptation under extreme environments. That was the moment everything changed, because the mystery was no longer about one civilization. It was about human evolution itself. Now let's go deeper. The child burial came from a Bronze Age Kurgan excavation near the southern Ural region. At first, archaeologists paid little attention to it. The grave lacked gold, no ceremonial weapons, no royal ornaments, just bones. But modern DNA sequencing changed its importance completely. Researchers extracted genetic material from the petrous portion of the skull, one of the densest bones in the human body, perfect for preserving ancient DNA. The results triggered intense debate. The child carried genetic markers associated with neurological growth regulation and stress adaptation at unusually high frequencies compared to nearby agricultural populations. Again, scientists remained careful. Genes are probabilities, destiny, not destiny. Still, pattern repeated. Then researchers widened the dataset. Ancient genomes from across Eurasia entered comparison models. Hunter-gatherers, farmers, nomadic pastoralists, early urban societies. The results became more complex. No civilization possessed some magical intelligence gene. That idea collapsed quickly. Instead, different environments appeared to shape different cognitive pressures. Agricultural societies favored stability, planning, social hierarchy. Maritime societies favored navigation, risk management. Spatial memory, mountain populations showed signs of physiological adaptation tied to endurance and environmental stress. And the steppe? The steppe appeared to reward rapid adaptation, mobility, coordination. Decision-making under uncertainty, this mattered enormously because it reframed intelligence itself, not as a ladder, but as specialization. One anthropologist described ancient civilization like an ecosystem. Different pressures created different strengths. That explanation solved many mysteries, but not all of them, because one contradiction remained. Why did steppe-related populations repeatedly become associated with elite dominance after migration? Europe, South Asia, Central Asia, the pattern kept returning. Yes, military technology mattered, but military victory alone rarely changes language, culture, and social structure permanently. Something else amplified their influence. Researchers proposed several theories. Horse domestication created mobility advantages. Patriarchal clan systems increased expansion speed. Disease exposure altered demographic survival. All plausible. Yet another factor kept appearing quietly beneath the surface. Information transfer. Stupi societies function like moving networks. Ideas traveled with people constantly. Unlike isolated cities, mobile populations exchanged knowledge across enormous distances. Metalworking techniques, breeding strategies, trade intelligence, military tactics, innovation spread faster. And that speed may have created compounding advantages. No one expected what next, because computational historians began modeling the process. Using migration simulations, researchers tested how mobile knowledge networks influence societal development. The results were startling. Under certain conditions, decentralized mobile cultures could outperform larger settled societies in adaptability, especially during periods of environmental instability. And the Bronze Age experienced exactly that. Climate fluctuations, core competition, population pressure. The ancient world was unstable. In unstable systems, adaptability becomes survival. Then came a controversial reanalysis of ancient educational attainment polygenic data. The researchers published cautiously, very cautiously. They emphasized limitations repeatedly. Modern educational attainment is not ancient intelligence. Cultural context matters enormously, but despite every disclaimer, one conclusion remained difficult to ignore. Some ancient steppe populations consistently showed higher frequencies of variance statistically associated with cognitive performance in modern datasets, not dramatically, not superhuman. but enough to attract attention. The media exploded, headlines distorted everything. Ancient geniuses, lost master civilization, the smartest ancient humans, scientists panicked. Because that was never the claim. The truth was subtler, and far more important. Human cognition adapts rapidly to environmental pressures. Civilization itself changes the brain over time. That revelation terrified some researchers because it implied history is not fixed. Human potential shifts constantly. Then another discovery deepened the mystery: ancient dietary analysis. Using isotope testing, researchers reconstructed Bronze Age nutrition patterns. Steppe populations consumed unusually protein-rich diets compared to many early agricultural communities, more animal products. More mobility, different developmental pressures, nutrition affects cognition, so does disease exposure, so does childhood stress. Suddenly the old question, which civilization was smartest, seemed hopelessly simplistic. Civilizations weren't static. They were biological systems interacting with environment, and some environments accelerated adaptation faster than others. This is where the story gets strange, because the more science explained, less human history looked accidental. The rise and fall of civilizations may not depend solely on resources or military power. Cognitive flexibility could matter just as much. The ability to reorganize quickly, learn faster, cooperate under pressure, transmit information efficiently. And if that's true, then forgotten societies may have shaped the modern world far more deeply than famous empires. For centuries, historians searched for the greatest civilization, the smartest, the most advanced, the true origin of progress. But the evidence pointed somewhere unexpected. There was no single superior civilization, no lost race of ancient geniuses. The real discovery was something far stranger. Human intelligence evolved through networks. Ideas moved faster than kingdoms. People carried innovation across continents long before modern globalization. The forgotten steppe populations mattered not because they were magically smarter, but because they became connectors, bridges between worlds. They linked Europe to Asia. Nomadic systems to agricultural systems, metalworking regions to trade corridors, and through that movement, knowledge accelerated. Now zoom closer to the burial mound, to the child grave, to the DNA sequences extracted from ancient bone. The shocking discovery wasn't raw intelligence, it was adaptability, gelization after generation. These populations survived unstable conditions requiring constant learning, movement manner, cooperation. Over time, those pressures shaped both culture and biology. The archaeological evidence matched the genetics, not perfectly, but consistently enough to force a new interpretation of ancient history. The civilizations remembered today were not isolated miracles. They were products of interconnected human evolution. And many forgotten cultures played critical roles, including the steppe societies history barely discussed. What they found shocked everyone, because the findings destroyed an old myth, the myth that civilization develops in clean, isolated stages: primitive, advanced, superior, inferior. Reality looked messier and more human. Different populations adapted differently. Some specialized in navigation, some in administration, some in trade, some in mobility. The modern world emerged from all of them, together. Researchers analyzing migration timing discovered that major cognitive and cultural transitions often followed periods of environmental instability: climate stress, drought-mar collapse, crisis-forced adaptation, and adaptation accelerated innovation. That means some of humanity's greatest advances may have emerged not during peace, not survival. The implication was enormous. Ancient intelligence was not about superiority, it was about resilience. Who adapted fastest when the world became unstable? And suddenly, the forgotten steppe civilizations looked different. Not as mysterious conquerors, but as survivors shaped by one of Earth's harshest environments. Their legacy spread everywhere. in languages, in trade systems, in social organization. Possibly even in how human populations adapted cognitively over time. And that question has never been fully answered. There's something deeply unsettling about this story, because it changes how we see ourselves. Most people imagine history as fixed, a timeline. Great civilizations rise then vanish, but genetics tells another story. The past is still alive inside language, inside culture, inside us. The forgotten steppe populations did not disappear completely. Their descendants spread across continents. Their influence merged into countless societies, modern nations. Modern languages, modern identities. Human history is not isolated bloodlines. It is mixture, movement, adaptation. That realization matters today. Because modern politics often tries dividing humanity into rigid categories, pure, separate, superior, but ancient DNA keeps revealing the opposite. Civilizations survived through connection, through exchange, through migration. The smartest societies may not have been the strongest or richest or largest. Maybe the most successful humans were simply the most adaptable, the most capable of learning from strangers, changing under pressure, sharing knowledge. There's another emotional layer too. Forgotten civilizations deserve remembrance, not because they were perfect, not because they were superior, but because history narrowed our attention. Entire peoples vanished from public memory, while others became legends. The steppe cultures were often treated like background noise. Now science suggests they helped shape the modern world, quietly, almost invisibly. And maybe that's the most haunting part. How many other forgotten civilizations changed history without recognition? How many buried graves still wait underground? How many stories remain hidden because nobody looked closely enough? One line from an archaeologist captures the feeling perfectly. The past is never truly gone. We simply stop listening to it, and somewhere beneath the grasslands of Eurasia, countless voices still remain unheard. At the beginning of this story, the question seemed simple. Which ancient civilization showed the highest genetic indicators connected to cognition? But the deeper researchers looked, less meaningful that question became, because intelligence was never isolated. It moved across migrations, across trade routes, across generations. The forgotten steppe societies were not alone. No civilization ever was. Human history was built by networks of adaptation. And the people history ignored may have mattered most. Somewhere tonight, inside a museum archive, ancient bones still wait for analysis. Inside frozen soil, entire genomes remain undiscovered. New technology will uncover more patterns, more migrations, more forgotten connections. And maybe more uncomfortable truths, because every new discovery keeps pointing toward the same realization. The story of civilization is not about isolated greatness, it is about survival through change. The kingdoms ended, the empires collapsed, but the adaptations remained. And somewhere, right now, inside an unopened grave beneath the Eurasian steppe, may rest the final piece of the story. We just haven't found it yet.